recording. All right. So I remember when I first moved to Vancouver, I'm from Toronto, and they had some pretty big voices on the radio out there. And then all of a sudden they came here and I said, I recognize that one voice. And it ended up being Al Murdoch, who at the time, if memory serves me correct, that was LG 73, was it not?
It was, yeah.
94, 95, somewhere in there.
Yeah, mid '90s. I had just left CFox, the sister station down the hall, the big FM rocker, and moved to afternoon drive at LG 73, Hot Hits LG 73, and I stayed there for 7, almost 8 years.
Well, I wanted to say congratulations, because if memory serves me correct, it's your 20-year anniversary of your personal company.
Yeah, well, I think, it's a little over that. It's almost close to 25. I think I joined LinkedIn, wow. I think, and that's where it's kind of posted. But I mean, I started my production company about 97, I would say, and then left radio to pursue voiceover work and all the extracurricular activity that lends itself to that in 2001, right after the Vancouver Grizzlies left town, as a matter of fact, ironically.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. Al, I want to take you down a walk down memory lane, because obviously you're a kid that went to BCIT. Do you still remember the class of? And take me through, as you were working your way through those 2 years of school, when you realized, this is the direction that I want to go. Because they offer you a couple of different options. When did you realize that you wanted to take your voice in that direction?
Well, way before a BCIT, I was, I've told this story many times before, but I'll tell it again. I was 6 years old growing up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and my dad worked for Canadian General Electric. So he would bring all the new, gadgets home, the hot new record players or the transistor radios. That's dating me a little bit. And we would test them, me and my sister, and tell them, what was good about them, what was bad. And I remember being 6 years old and riding around the neighborhood on my bike with an AM transistor radio with a leather strap on it, and listening to the voice that came out of that speaker, and it spoke directly to me. So there was an instant connection, and I thought to myself, well, this seems like a fun thing to do. Maybe down the road when I get bigger and my voice changes, maybe it's something that I could do. So, all through school and high school, and then going into, BCIT, I was already working at CKNW. I got a job there right out of high school. I bugged them every second day for 4 weeks until they gave me a job as a board operator. And that just kind of started my career in radio.
Who gave you that job?
A fine man by the name of Dale Biot, who is no longer in the industry. He's actually a designer now, interior designer. He was a very creative guy, and I remember he finally saw me, because I never got past the receptionist. She would say, "Oh, maybe today's the day somebody's going to see you," and then finally she said, "Listen, I'm going to go in. I'm going to grab someone, and he'll have a couple of minutes to talk to you." So I went into his office. Some small talk. He found out that I had zero experience whatsoever, but that I had a love and a passion for getting into radio. So after about 15 minutes, he just literally leaned over the desk and said, you young guys are always looking for a break to get into this business, and I'm going to give you one. But then seconds later he said, "But don't you screw it up, because it's on me." And I took those words to heart. The late great John Ashbridge used to say, "Don't F it up," to me a lot. So it just kind of carried on decades later, that phrase.
He never changed in all his time. I remember him sauntering up to the top of the press box at Nat Bailey Stadium, and he'd look at me to be like, "All right, what are we going to screw up today?" And then he'd go sit down and just have the time of his life.
Yeah. Exactly.
When you were there, when you were first starting out, there were some pretty big names in that building, were there not?
Oh my gosh. Some of the most legendary names in radio broadcasting, not only in Canada, but I would say in North America. Brian Frosty Forrest. You had John Ashbridge. You had John McComb, who was still there and, of course, retired a couple of years ago. You had Rick Honey. You had Dave McCormick. You had Rafe Mayer. You had Big Al Davidson. You had Neil McRae. And a very, very huge mentor in my life, Red Robinson. He was there at the time doing his Red Robinson reunion show. And me as an 18-year-old kid right out of high school, getting an opportunity after only about 6 months working there, producing a show for Red Robinson on Saturday nights on the big powerhouse, the big Top Dog, is an experience that, it seems like yesterday, but it really kind of formed kind of how I ended up moving on in my career.
I would imagine some of those names are the kind of guys that would appreciate people that put their head down and just work. They don't suffer fools. And I'm just going to throw a couple of those names back at you. Maybe tell me something about them that, we haven't talked about in a while. For example, tell me something about Red back in his prime that maybe I wouldn't know.
A lot of people, look at Red, he had the big radio disc jockey voice, that harkened back, to the early days of, CKWX and CJOR and CFUN. And he had that big voice. But the thing about Red was when you listen to him on his show, or anytime he ever talked, he was such an amazing storyteller. And the stories weren't written down. They were all inside here. He had an amazing memory. You could name a song. Like I knew a lot about music before I got, into working with Red, but to produce a show like Red's show, and he would bring in these old gems, and he would talk about, the times that he would interview these types of people. And of course, Red was on stage introducing the Beatles, and he did a whole bunch of other great stuff. And then when Expo 86 came, he produced the Legends of Rock and Roll series. And because I was producing his show, I got to go with him backstage and meet the likes of Ray Charles and Freddie Cannon and Lou Christie and Jan and Dean and all of these just fantastic cornerstones of rock and roll. I learned a lot really through osmosis with Red.
Perfectionist, or one of those guys that could just do everything off the top? You mentioned that everything that he had was in here. Was he one of those guys that walked in with a stack of papers, or was he the guy that walked in with one napkin and said, let's go?
Yeah, pretty much. He like I said, he was an encyclopedia of rock and roll, and he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't know if anybody knows that, but he's one of the very few Canadian broadcasters that's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and well deserved, because he put rock and roll on the map here in Canada.
Somebody said, I don't know if it was Gary Rabel or somebody, not to name drop here, but somebody told me a story about Al Davidson getting in a fight. And I'm sure that it probably happened at some point.
This one?
I know. So I guess my question is, you talk about personalities that are larger than life. And I've always found that music has their kind of bubble, and sports has their bubble. And every once in a while they'll mesh. But I don't know how many times you cross paths with Big Al, but can you describe to today's sports guy that thinks he's hard hitting what hard hitting really looks like?
You talk about, off the cuff stuff that Red had. Well, Al would do that with his noon sportscast. Now, those were renowned. You would tune in. Radio's changed a lot. Back there used to be those staples. Like you'd listen to the NW Major News at noon. A lot of times it was John Ashbridge doing that, and that would lead right into Big Al Davidson and his sports. So Al would go in with a stack of papers, but if you watched him do it from the control room like I did, he was in the booth and I was in the control room pushing all the buttons. You watched him do his sportscast. He wouldn't read that sportscast. That was just there just in case, he needed to get back on track, because, he would start here and then he would go off into a tangent, and then he'd do an editorial about this guy that he didn't like, or that player that just, he just blew it last night. I remember one story really quickly here. CFMI. This was the CKNW CFMI studios back in New Westminster, 815 McBride, back in the day. And the FM station CFMI was going through some studio renovations. So that was right next to the booth where CKNW read their news and sports. So Al's in the middle of his sportscast, and all of a sudden he hears this bang, 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 and saws going and electric stuff and people talking. He was in the middle of a sportscast talking about, I can't remember. He literally got up from his chair, didn't turn his mic off, got up from his chair, and I'm going, well, what am I supposed to do? Should I cut him off? Should I go to commercial? He looked at me, he goes, don't do anything. And he walked around, opened up the door, 2 doors, looked down the hallway and said, hey, I'm doing a bloody sportscast down here. Would you keep it down? And he walked back in, sat back down, and picked up exactly from the spot that he left that sportscast, and continued on without. I mean, it was just, as a young kid watching these pros do that, you kind of thought, my goodness, what business am I getting into here? But he was outstanding.
I have to tell you, it's so funny you brought this particular story up. So 2014, Vancouver Canadians, John Schneider is the manager. He's now with the Blue Jays. We're doing this stupid interview. We got to do it every fourth inning and seventh inning, like clockwork. So you know what? He's sitting there and he's like, oh, this guy threw well. All of a sudden, the umpire down the first base line makes a bad call. He takes the microphone, goes out, argues with the guy, comes back and says, yeah, so anyways, this guy was throwing balls in the dirt. And I thought to myself, in that moment, I probably felt exactly like you. Like, what do I do? Do I cut his mic and whatever? But we just left it, let it ride, and it was fantastic radio. So I guess that kind of leads to my next question to you. What makes fantastic radio in your estimation?
Wow. I think, well, first off, I think what radio's missing these days. And when you talk about radio, I mean, radio's vast, obviously. There's talk
Yes.
radio, there's sports radio, there's music, there's a lot of stuff out there to choose from. But I think it's really about theater of the mind. I think it's about first having an instant connection like you and I are talking to right now. It's you and me. We're talking, it's one-on-one. And I think that some of that has been lost. I think maybe over the years people forgot about the listener. It's not listeners, it's not thousands, it's not millions of people out there. It's connecting with that one person that happens to be listening. And if you can make your information and your entertainment and all that content, you know, strictly for that person. I mean, obviously you want to make it broad in terms of like the overall sense, but connecting with one person and theater of the mind, creating stuff, creating events that people want to talk about the next day. I remember growing up as a kid listening to Doc Harris and listening to Red Robinson or Frosty specifically, because every morning, him and Neil McCraig would get going. And again, none of that stuff was planned. They would have such a great chemistry that you would literally go to work or you go to school or whatever, and that would be water cooler talk. And I think a lot of that is missing. I don't know what you think about that kind of thing, but I think some of that is missing.
I think, if I appreciate you even considering my thoughts on this, the one difference is now everybody tries to be like somebody else. I feel like those guys were innovators, that they didn't care what anybody else thought. They were going to do it their way with their techniques and their style. And I'm sure a guy like Neil McCrae, if I use the sports adage, knew what it took to poke the bear, but
Hmm.
he didn't change for anybody. And
No.
I fear that in today's industry, everybody wants to be the next Jim Rome or the next Dan Patrick or the next insert name here. And I miss the creativity. I miss not being afraid to just kind of be yourself. And that to me is the lost art of it all, is we're all trying to be that guy instead of just being ourselves and seeing where that wind can take us. But
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of pressure that comes with today's
oh, for sure.
media, obviously, because back in the day you had so many companies that owned radio stations, and now it's three or four or half a dozen that own all radio and television stations, and they're so looking towards their shareholders and the bottom line and all this kind of stuff. So everyone's going, well, if I say this, will that annoy management? Therefore annoy the guys in Toronto or Calgary or whatever the head office is. And so I think a lot of that, back in the day, they didn't care about that. Al Davidson could care less what the Griffiths family who owned the station, he could care less what they thought. I'm on here, I'm getting paid exactly what you put me in here to do. Just let me do it and leave me alone.
The other thing that I don't see as much, and maybe it's because I don't travel the way that I used to, I miss on location events. Like that used to be a big to do. Like you would be like, hey, man, this guy's going to be here between 2 and 4, and you got to get there. And it just doesn't seem like now they send out street teams and what have you. But I just imagine the connectivity that you have with a listener or listeners in that moment to physically be able to walk up and shake a hand of one of the giants that you've been listening to is still a big deal. And I don't know if that still happens, but I want to take that to the next question, because connecting with an individual is one thing. Connecting with 18,000 fans is another thing. So I want to kind of lead you into your PA stuff, because it's such a big part of this city. And people ask me, like, who are the guys? And of course, you got to mention Ash because of what he did with the Canucks for all of those years. But I got to say, standing right beside him, Al, is what you've been able to do in this city in 2 sports, which doesn't, and maybe even more than that if you really want to flesh out what you've done. But let's just talk about the stuff at Rogers Arena or General Motors Place. Let's talk about what it's like trying to captivate 18,000 and change on a nightly basis. What are some of the tricks of that trade?
Wow. The tricks of the trade. I think it's going back to being yourself again. I think that if you go in there as a fan, number one, I'm a fan. I think one thing that Ash always used to say to me, and this is even like we met back in, in the mid 80s, but then we kind of, we didn't see each other for a long time. And then when I got the job with the Grizzlies, we would see each other in passing as he would be doing the Canucks. But I think being yourself and connecting with the fans as well. But he said the first thing you have to do is the first job of a PA announcer is to inform. The second part is to entertain. So the information part, you've got to get it out there. Now, obviously, it's changed over the years. I still try to use some of the stuff that I did back in the Grizzlies days in terms of player introductions and goal announcements and all of that kind of stuff. But all the other stuff, it's about passing on information to the people, the bums in the seats, and for people at home that might not have got it from the play-by-play people and the color. I don't know about tricks to the trade. Again, I try to be myself. I try to energize the crowd when it needs to be, and then I try to step back a little bit as well. It's really about letting things breathe, and I like to see more of that. As a matter of fact, I like to see maybe maybe having a little bit of quiet just for 2 or 3 seconds before something happens. Do you know what I'm saying? But other than that, I mean, it's I've been very fortunate to do the Grizzlies and do the Canucks. They're different animals altogether, but I love them both the same.
Jerry Howarth, who was one of my mentors growing up, Blue Jays. I did my first Toronto Blue Jay broadcast back in 2018. And in the 4th inning, we got an email. Ben Wagner and I got an email. And the guy in the back, Jason Rosen, says, don't read the email till the game's over. So immediately, it's like a kid who wants to touch the hot element. You got to read it. So we go to commercial. And he says, I had to turn you guys off in the 2nd inning because all you guys do is talk. So part of me was completely mortified, but part of me totally understood what he was saying. He goes, you got to let this breathe. Silence is okay in these moments. And so it was a really valuable lesson. I'm sorry that it took me into my mid-40s to get that lesson, but I got it and it's good. So I guess my question is, with the Canucks, you're sitting up high. You've got the bird's eye view. You look down, you see the world from, above. You had a front row seat with the Grizzlies. So in addition to, the big bellowing voice, there must have been some pretty cool moments or pretty cool interactions that you were feet away from. Can you walk me through maybe 1 or 2 of those?
Kobe Bryant, Akeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Scottie Pippen. Just those names, you get those visions in your mind. You've watched them your whole life, and then they're literally inches away from you checking into the game. So, the first half of the first season that I ever did, I mean, my mouth was dropping all the time because as excited I was to have the Vancouver Grizzlies in town and me being a part of that organization, it was still new. And to see these legends come in and to see what they did, and it almost effortlessly, it was quite an exciting time for me. And of course, and then when the Grizzlies won, now everyone will say, well, that rarely happened. And it's true. They didn't win a lot of games, but when they did, oh my gosh, it's like we had won the NBA championship every single time that we won. And that was pretty cool as well. And so walking you through the 6 years that they were there, it was, it was heartache when they left, but I'm glad that they were here, even though it was only 6 years and people talk about the fact that they want them back. It's going to take a whole lot of billions for that to happen, unfortunately. But I'm glad that they were here, even if it only was for 6 years.
Must have been tough. Like as a fan sitting there, you're like, oh gosh, my team's losing again. Was it hard for you to try to keep fans energized, or because you had such a connection with the team, like you got to see them all the time, you probably knew them almost as friends. Did that make it a little easier to try and sell their lack of success?
I think the big thing with the Vancouver Grizzlies and our game presentation team that we had there, which was unbelievable.
It was
a lot of them newbies, a lot of them, had never done those particular jobs before, but had a passion for the game just like we all did. I think Greg von Schottenstein, who was the director of game presentation at the time, who hired me, again, after persistence, after me literally saying, I missed the auditions, I've got to come see you, I'm the guy for the job. When he hired me, and we had a chance to work together, and he would literally sit right next to me and tap me on the hand as a cue. Like, I didn't wear a headset. I didn't like wearing headsets. I didn't like having an IFB in my ear. So he would literally just tap me on the arm when I needed to do, specific announcements and stuff like that. In terms of the gameplay, he left that all up to me, which is pretty cool. But in terms of game presentation, we knew that the product on the court, might not be as good as the opposing team coming in. So we had to put on the best show we possibly could every single game. And I will tell you, in my experience of going to other buildings in the NBA who do fantastic jobs, I think we were on par, with the top echelon in terms of game presentation teams, because we had to be. We had to put on an even better show around the game, because, the odds were we weren't going to win that night. And so when we would go in pre-production meetings and talk, we would say, okay, we've got a lot of stuff to do tonight. Let's go out there and give them a fantastic show. And I think we succeeded more often than not.
Oh my gosh. That I will say. I want to talk about Arthur Griffiths, because that's a guy that I think, is almost out of people's psyches because it's been so long. The family is one thing, but Arthur was a guy that liked to hang around. You'd see him courtside, and you'd see him. I know that right now, this organization with Francesco Aquilini and all the different layers to this, they get dragged through the mud because of social media. And I don't want to go that direction, but I think people forget how important the Griffiths family was to bringing two major properties to the city. Can you walk me through any interactions that you had with Arthur or that family, and why I think, and maybe you would agree or disagree, I don't know, but how important they were to the sports landscape that we still enjoy today?
Well, like you said, we wouldn't have the Canucks. And of course, a lot of that had to do with his father. But that being said, Arthur did take over years later and ran the operations for the Canucks. And of course, he built then GM Place, now Rogers Arena. He did that without getting any government help. He went out there and secured the financing, which might have been the ultimate kind of thing that ended up, him leaving and losing control of the team, because there was just not a lot of money left. But Arthur was so passionate about bringing the NBA to Vancouver. And I got to know Arthur quite well, not only through the Grizzlies and the Canucks, but later on, he ended up, small world, working as a consultant in a company that my wife worked for. So she would have a lot of meetings and a lot of, get-togethers with Arthur, and, we would get together. And so I would get to know him personally. And he's such a genuine, honest, nice man. And everyone sees that every time they see him on the street. He'll stop, he'll talk to people. He loves to talk about the days that he was involved with the team. And I know in his heart that he would like to be a part of it, but he would be there every game. And he would be cheering on just like every other fan, because he wanted it to succeed so bad. And even as the team was, you could see the team was getting ready to leave. And you knew it had just been bought by Heisley, and he had lost control, but he was still there. He still wanted to be there. He still wanted to see what was going to happen with the team. And of course, he still goes to Canuck games as well. You see him in the alumni suite, and he's still got a passion for the game. So I respect that man very, very much.
I was talking about him just the other day, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to ask Al this, because he's probably had a chance to catch up with him. Sure enough, you have. Al, I know I've only got a couple more minutes here. I want to circle back on the here and the now, because it's a pretty big deal when the NHL reaches out to you and says, we want you for our marquee events. That's a really big ticket item. Can you talk to me about A, how they approached you, and B, what it must have felt like when all of a sudden you realized, wow, all of these things are going to have my brand on it?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting. I had an opportunity to, of course, work for the NHL when the China games first started with the Canucks and the Los Angeles Kings. So we got to fly to China, and I had an opportunity to work with Steve Mayer and John Piccaro and the game presentation and event staff at the NHL, which are outstanding people. Talk about passion. I mean, they love the sport and they love the show. So, I'd done a few more events with them. I'd done the draft. And then after doing so many of the, Winter Classics and the Stadium Series and the Heritage Classics and all those big signature events like the All-Star Game, they decided that they wanted one production team to do everything. And so they hired this fantastic company to come in, and they would produce all of those big events. So it'd be the same team moving from event to event. So you wouldn't go to each city and have to work with new people. Not that they weren't talented, but it was kind of a good synergy to have as you move those events around the globe. So when John Picaro phoned me up and said, listen, we loved, working with you in all of the previous kind of events. We're thinking about bringing in one voice to kind of be the signature voice of these events. Would you be interested? It took me a half a second to say yes. But then I was conscious too about the fact that, having one voice, like Alan Roach, for example, the voice of the Colorado Avalanche, but he's also the voice of the Olympics, and he's the voice of Super Bowls as well. I was quite conscious about going into markets like Dallas for the Winter Classic, St. Louis for the All-Star Game, Colorado Springs for the Stadium Series, and kind of taking the gig away from the local PA announcer, because there's 31 of us, soon to be 32 with Seattle, and we're a PA brotherhood. We respect each other. We want each other to do well, and we want our teams to beat each other. But that's kind of beside the point. But I didn't want to take a gig away from that local PA announcer. So I'm so glad that we came to an agreement that I could come in and kind of do all of the TV stuff, the big intros for the teams, and the halftime shows, and the period intermissions and all of that kind of great stuff. And then the in-game kind of experience was left to Jeff Kay in Dallas, Tom Calhoun in St. Louis, and Alan Roach in Colorado. So again, there was no stepping on anybody's toes.
I will say this, as a kid that grew up in Toronto, Maple Leaf Gardens had a really distinct voice. The Blue Jays had a really distinct voice over the years. I mean, they are as much a part of the fabric of a childhood for a kid as the play-by-play guy is. Do you realize where your place is in the big scheme of things? I mean, you hear your voice, you close your eyes, you are the Grizzlies. You are this generation of the Canucks. I mean, I know that you're a pretty humble guy, but do you realize the magnitude of what your voice means to an entire community?
That's a really hard question to answer. I'm just really grateful. I've been very fortunate. I've worked extremely hard, but I'm very fortunate to have been in the right place at the right time, kind of push doors open that, may not have been open to begin with, and kind of smash them down a little bit. But there was always somebody on the other side to give me an opportunity. So I've been really lucky that way. In terms of how people kind of feel about me, you'll have to ask them. But I really do enjoy when people do recognize my voice, and people do, just like they did with Ashbridge. We would be out having a beer, at a local pub somewhere, and John and I'd be talking, and all of a sudden, oh, you're John Ashbridge, aren't you? And and it does happen to me now. And it is quite neat to talk to fans, because again, it's about connection. We get back to what we talked about right at the beginning. It's about connecting with fans and having them meet you, and having me meet them is pretty exciting.
I used to do Canadians baseball with a guy named Chris Pritchett, who's now the head coach at UBC. And Jim Robson, he'll always sneak into the game, sit at the top of section 1, and just kind of watch the game. Still pays for his tickets when he goes to the baseball game. And he came up to me, he goes, "Rob, I got to tell you about those broadcasts." And right away, I thought, oh my God, this is the moment. He's going to tap me on the shoulder with a sword. He goes, "That's such a good voice." And I was like, oh my God, it's happening. This is amazing. What am I wearing? And he goes, "You got to tell Pritch next time you see him, I love that voice." It's just like, no,
that's pretty cool, eh? Yeah.
Oh, but it was so good just to hear that. And I sit back and I say to myself, those are the moments that I take with me moving forward more than anything else. So my last question for you, and I ask this of every single person that I interview, take me to one moment in your career where you said, how the heck did I get here? Maybe you're in a moment with somebody that walked past you and you're just like, oh my God, look who that is. Or a scenario where you were kind of like, I can't believe that kid that used to be in Winnipeg with the, radio hitched up in the back is in this moment. Can you take me to one of those places?
Yeah. Two moments. One was the last game that Daniel and Henrik Sedin played at Rogers Arena, and we know how it ended. And and have myself announce those goals, the game winner in overtime, and have them, to announce them as co-first stars, knowing full well that it was going to be the last game that we would see them at home in a Canucks uniform. So talk about emotional. So that was one for sure. The second one would be me wandering around the Cotton Bowl in Dallas for the Winter Classic. As a fan of not only hockey but college football, talk about the legacy of just a venue. So I made sure that that I wandered around the Cotton Bowl for probably 25, 30 minutes and sat in each little part of that stadium and looked around and said, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe where I am." And then that really hits you. And that's when you become hopefully grateful. And that's when I did. I went, "Oh my gosh," like, it's not like I made it. Yes, like I'm here, like I'm number one and all that stuff. It was really more about, wow, all that work is, it's starting to pay off a little bit. And this is a lot of fun. And that's at the end of the day, that's why I'm doing it. Because the fun quotient has got to be very, very high for me to do it.
Such an impressive interview. Thank you. I could talk to you for 5 hours, but just great stuff. I don't even need to edit this one. I might take a couple of my stumbles out, but we're good to go. Al,
Well,
thank you for this.
I'm just gonna plug something real quick here. You can see that I'm wearing my Canucks alumni shirt, and I want to remind everybody that Canuck Country Rocks is coming up on April the 29th. It's going virtual this year, of course, but it's all to raise money for mental health initiatives and programs locally. The Canucks alumni, a lot of them will be a part of this event, and then of course Aaron Pritchett, Chad Brownlee, a Canuck draft pick, 2003. Jojo Mason, Megan Patrick, The Odds, Dallas Smith. They're all going to be there virtually performing for you. So please support the cause. The Canucks alumni do so much great work in our community. You can pick up tickets at VancouverCanucksAlumni.org. April 29th. Be there. Canucks alumni.
I will tag it on all of our social media as well, because that's what you do in 2021.
Of course you do.
Al, thank you for this. Like, outstanding stuff. I couldn't have asked for anything more.
And hopefully, congratulations to you on the Nation and SportsBar Radio. You made the pivot so quickly. I'm so happy for you.
I remember when we showed up and realized none of us had a job anymore. I was like, oh my God. So the fact that a week later I had something is great. And next week they're announcing that I'm the Fraser Valley Bandits play-by-play guy. So I got back into basketball, which I'm super excited about.
Outstanding. How about
it's
woo?
I'll take that. From you, I will take that any day of the week. Al, thank you, man. This is awesome. Hopefully we'll cross paths again soon.
I hope so. Thank you, my friend.
Okay. Take care, Al. See ya.